I had really good mentors there, right?
Right.
So the CEO, my boss, who was the SVP of strategy, or sort of
Mhm.
the COO role, I learned how a restructuring effort works and how hard it can be to execute a turnaround. The biggest difficulty in
Yeah.
turning around a ship is culture. That like it's really hard to build culture. It's really hard to keep culture. It's really hard to how to shape or reshape culture. And to a certain extent, we were able to do that.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that Jagex has gone on to be a very very successful company
Yeah.
after that, and I'm not taking anything away from the team. Some people helped me out in that same process.
Wow.
Uh, my boss there at that time, and the CEO,
Mhm.
and I was able to convert that PhD scholarship towards an MBA.
Oh, wow.
And I did a part-time MBA at Cambridge because I was living and working there. So it was if you're joining as a product man or like a marketing manager in Europe for a US-centered, US headquartered tech company, you'd probably
Sure.
face similar
Sure.
challenges because there's going to be a PM, a lead PM there in America who's going to
Mhm.
be driving, or maybe lead product marketing manager in America who's going to be driving all the roadmap and efforts. And then you need to, of course, you need to play assist, right? Like
Mhm.
that you need to play a team, but then you need to figure out how you can add that extra mile of value. That how do you sort of add and accelerate and catalyze the business in certain situations. You probably would benefit more from a big tech job, and maybe in other situations the startup experience would be more valuable. I think for me both are equally valuable.
Hi, everybody. Today I have someone who's a really special guest. Sajjad Rahman has a multifaceted career, 10 plus years of experience. He worn multiple hats in building corporate strategy, looking after business development, global expansion for some of the most renowned companies. And they include Twitch, Unstoppable Domains, many other experiences that you've had in turning around a games company as well, which I don't know too much about, but I'm excited to hear more about your experience, Sajjad. But I think I would really want to know, because this is one thing that I always ask my guests. All these goals, everything that we achieve are what we've sort of seen, or some of the goals that we've sort of encountered while we're growing up. How is your upbringing, and how is your, like, how were you as a kid growing up? Like, how was your experience in your background?
Yeah, I I was sort of the black sheep of the family, right? So
High five to that.
my mom's yeah, my mom's side of the family, everybody was a nerd and an overachiever. Um, and I was the quintessential underachiever in the family. So I thought I had a lot of potential. I was very creative when I was a kid, but I would just not do as well on tests very early on.
Right. Yeah.
And to be honest, like I think in retrospect, I'd say that um, I lacked impetus, right? I didn't really have goals. I just like to daydream a lot. I'd like to
Wow.
think about things a lot, but I
Mhm.
would not spend my energies in an efficient way. And thankfully that changed. And I think there was an inflection point somewhere in the middle of my undergrad where I realized that, you know, that's it's been fun and it's sort of enabled
Mhm.
me to explore different parts of my brain and
Yeah.
what I want to do. But I probably want to focus somewhat more from here onwards.
Yeah.
And I think once you do that, and if you do that consistently enough, and you understand the value of compounding of efforts,
Mhm.
it changes your mindset. It changes your output. That's true, right? So, and for anybody, no matter what your intellectual capacity is. So, I think this is the thing I remember from that inflection point in the middle of my undergrad, which
Mhm.
was um, I realized that even if you make 1 ounce of an effort, you'll get some output, right? And if you keep making it, there's a multiplicative effect.
Mhm.
So, and I saw that in action, and I think from there onwards, obviously, I changed approach. But yeah, that's how it was. I was born and raised in Rawalpindi. My mom was a college professor in chemistry. I
Wow.
sucked at chemistry. Uh,
Right.
yeah, throughout that did not change. That did not change, no matter what. Uh,
Yeah.
and then I ended up doing my undergraduate in Pakistan, and then from there I went to the States for a while, and
Mhm.
then I've been around. Yeah.
Wow. But can you talk more about your later education as well? And then how did you start off with your work experience?
Yeah, so I think uh, half about So I think education, if you find education wherever you go, right? You can find it wherever you go.
Yes.
So I'd say that I learned less in my undergrad than what I learned in my first job as a design engineer.
Mm.
So it was, a really low paying job,
Yeah.
but probably the most interesting work I've done, and with some of the smartest people. Like a couple of my bosses over there, they really taught me to think in a good way about problems, right? And how to approach different problems. And
Mhm.
probably I learned a lot there about tackling problems, solving problems, building product.
Mhm.
That was as a design engineer in an embedded systems company in Pakistan. Or so in, I got the opportunity to go to Stanford for my master's degree. In it was management science and engineering, sort of an open bracket, industrial engineering, finance, operations, marketing. You sort of pick your own kind of uh, focus sort of degree, but I ended up focusing on finance and operations. So I spent about 2 years there in the Valley,
Mhm.
did a bunch of consulting work with startups there, with scale ups in fintech and clean tech.
Wow.
Explored again a lot of different areas. I think that was the right time to
Mhm.
do it.
Yes. True.
And then I had to come back for various reasons. First and foremost, obviously my commitment to Fulbright, but also because I had some family commitments here in Pakistan. So I spent
Mhm.
4 years in Pakistan,
Wow.
primarily in the telco sector, and then eventually left again for the UK. And this was 10 years ago.
Mhm.
So since then, I've been there. And during that time, I've worked, I'd say, so this third, I guess, uh, uh, um, I don't know what to call it, phase of my career has
Yeah.
been the last 10 years in primary. Some of it has been product,
Mhm.
but most of it go to market, corporate strategy, and business development
Wow.
with technology, startups and scale ups, and primarily across interactive entertainment and gaming,
Mhm.
live streaming, to a
Okay.
certain extent, fintech, and last but not least, Web3.
Wow.
So yeah, that's been sort of that my career.
Mhm.
During the time, I also got an MBA at Cambridge
Mhm.
in finance, and there's a whole different story to it
Mhm.
because I never wanted to do a second master's degree, but
Right.
uh, but I ended up doing it because there's an interesting story to it. And again, I spent time at INSEAD as well, learning M&A and corporate finance because we had to figure
Mhm.
out how to sell a business, and I'd never sold a business. I've never done sell side
Mhm.
M&A. But the reality is that, education, I mean, I'd say that's less than 40% of my education. The real education is if you're able to pick up a book every now and then, if you're able to go and listen to a podcast and really
Mhm.
go down rabbit holes and spend time in learning something that you really like. So
Wow.
if you don't stop doing and your education stops and you forget things.
Mhm. But in that sense, like, can you maybe share some of the podcasts or the books that have had sort of an impact on you?
Oh, wow. There's so many.
Mhm.
um, okay. So I think I'll tell you a few recent ones
Sure.
because I am fasting. So I think I'm
Yeah.
monitoring them. Yeah. So I think Tim Ferriss's podcast is
Yeah.
something I love, and it covers so many topics, but he brings on some really interesting people that bring you diverse perspectives on different. Yeah. Otherwise, I think more specific ones are around
Mhm.
specific topics like product and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
I think this is the one that I would probably spend the most time on or over the last few years.
Wow.
The most recent book that I'm reading right now is Build. Uh,
Okay.
I think amazing. Um, Again, it's written less like a, how should I put it? It's written in a bit of a instructional way. So
Mhm.
it's more like an academic textbook about how to build a product.
Okay.
But it does really cover a lot of topics about it's more than just building a product. It's about how you
Mhm.
build your career, how you focus on things, how you make decisions in different contexts when you're a startup or in a
Yeah.
scale up or in a cushy tech job, big tech job. How would you approach working with your boss in different ways? I would highly recommend it. And yeah, so that's one book that I think I'd
Mhm.
love. I'd recommend to people if you want to pick up and learn about building career or building product.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to take the link of the book from you later on, just in case I
Yep.
don't forget. later. But I really want to know, Sajjad, like in terms of your career, so you started off as a design engineer, and what you were doing most recently is a completely different domain of expertise. So how did you go from being a design engineer to a product person? And then I think most of your life you've been really into corporate strategy, business development. So how did all of these aspects in your career, build on top of each other?
Yeah, so let's break it down in two pieces, right? One is, how did I go from being a design engineer to going towards uh, product and corporate strategy, I guess. That's the
Yep.
first question. Yeah. So here's my, retrospective take on it, right? You need to have plans, and they never pan out the way you want them to pan out. But without plans, you're not going to get anywhere. So yeah, I'll tell you how I ended up there. Again, an inflection point. So back in 2008, I just wanted to continue my focus on engineering, electronics engineering. And after spending a year at that embedded system startup, I had gotten a scholarship at Technical University of Munich, which is a pretty good engineering school.
Yep.
And I was heading out there. And this was going to lead me to engineering, a career in core engineering, which could have been very good, right? Like, I think I'm not going to say that was a bad sort of option. But, so when I had gotten a scholarship, I was 6 months out from going there. I applied for the Fulbright. And when I applied for the Fulbright, I did not pick engineering as my focus. I was reading up about business, and I was reading about product and what product development means. It was very early days when people were exploring what, product, how to think about product versus engineering, right? And I was reading up about that, and that took me down rabbit holes. And I can't quote you the books or, articles I read at that time. But, like, I was just reading HBR and so stuff like that. And I was like, I probably want to go and explore this. So let me just apply here.
Wow.
And 2 days before I was flying out to Germany, my bags were packed. I got the call from Fulbright, and they told me I got the scholarship. So that's where a choice took place, really, right? Which was, am I going to Germany and to engineering, or I'm in a pretty good school, or am I going to go after Fulbright? And I don't know what school I get into, because it could have been, top 200 in the US, right? Or it could be a top university. I didn't know if I'd get into Stanford at that time. But do I want to go and do this? And I realized that, I had to decide really in those next few hours, because I was going to fly out otherwise. And I felt that this is where I want to be. So I want to go and explore how to build businesses and learn about doing that, rather than continuing my journey in core engineering. And yeah, that was an inflection point. So that led me down eventually to Stanford, eventually completing that MS in Management Sciences at Stanford, focusing on finance and ops and product, learning about how go-to-market happens in startups. We very interesting courses there at Stanford, taught very differently from other schools, especially because I can compare to Cambridge as well. And eventually, developing a passion for technology, especially consumer internet at that time. And then obviously, that led me down that rabbit hole, right? Eventually going into this direction. Yeah. So that's how
the rest of the,
yes. So that's how that happened. So now what was the second part of the question?
Like, how did you move towards corporate and then the business development side?
Yeah. So that after Stanford, the next few years were focused on product. And then it was again, and this was not a choice by design. Like, this was not something that I was proactively looking at how do I go and do corporate strategy. I wasn't in investment banking. I never spent time in investment banking. So this was purely coincidence, and a happy one. And well, in retrospect, a happy one, because of a pretty tough one when I got in. So this was at Jagex. So I after a few years in Pakistan, I'd gotten married. My partner had gotten into Oxford for a master's degree. She didn't go there because we were getting married. She told me afterwards. I was like, "What are you doing?" So we went to study abroad. So we decided to move abroad, and I got this job at this scale-up company called Jagex. And it was a very interesting situation. So it was a company that was backed by three really, really strong US VC and PE firms. And they had been in the business for about 4 years.
Wow.
But it was shaped in a very strange way versus what you would see in a growth equity investment round, right? The way the investment is structured and the team was structured, and the whole setup was very, very, very strange. So, and I had obviously at that time I did not know a lot about that. So I had just gone there. They director of strategy. I went in and joined. I thought it was really mostly product and go-to-market work, maybe focus on how do you build games. Turns out that wasn't the case. Turns out that the company was going in a direction that obviously the board was not very happy with. It was going towards, it was losing a lot of money. For the company had lost focus versus what had made it successful initially. So it was home to one of the biggest online multiplayer games in the world called RuneScape, which is still going strong. And that's what happened afterwards. But that game was losing players. The community was sort of dying out. The company had tried to do a lot of experimentation in new product development, which had failed, and wasn't going anywhere. So essentially, product was not a priority. They had a working product.
Right.
Figuring out the holistic strategy of the business was a priority, and restructuring that strategy, and then as a result, restructuring operations, costs, and directing the company towards a potential exit was the need of the day.
Wow.
And the opportunity was thrown to me. I guess that's how it happened. So working with the CEO, they're like, hey, who's going to go and do this? And it turns out, other than myself and a couple of other folks in the core CEO office, there was nobody else sort of looking or potentially had expertise to do this. So we looked at the numbers, we figured out what the numbers looked like, we figured out what we'd used, some pretty basic strategy frameworks to understand what is the company doing, what is it good at, what can it do in the future. And we had developed a few options for the board. Thankfully, one of those options was to really strip down that business to a very bare bone asset and sell it, which wasn't taken. Instead, they took the strategy of actually expanding, but expanding close to the core, which was a core franchise. So that led my journey to corporate strategy. I got exposed to FP&A. I got exposed to budgeting, restructuring budgets, restructuring P&Ls of the business, educating people about better cost management and aligning it with this company strategy. And then eventually, once we succeeded with that, so we went from, the company went from, losing a bunch of money every year to making a lot of profit every year. I think north of $30 to $40 million. We were going to sell the business. And again, in this case, like there was nobody else in the core team who could do it. And I had not done it. I was not expert at sell-side M&A, but I was like, let's go and equip ourselves with the tools needed to do this. So I ended up doing a executive course in M&A and corporate finance at INSEAD. It polished up my corporate finance skills, which I learned at Stanford, but then also gave me new skills about understanding how to think about an acquisition. How do you prioritize what the board is looking for? What will make the sale happen? What we need to make sure to when it comes to post-merger integration, so that there's continuity in business and the business continues to find success. And also how to value the business appropriately, right? So we can negotiate the right price. So yeah, that also happened. I think the business sold for, this was way back in 2016. So if I don't get the numbers right, but I think north of 400 million plus nearly 500 million in total, right? Consideration. And yeah, so that's how the journey into corporate strategy happened. And then eventually that led me into corporate development. We started building an M&A program for acquisition of other assets in the game space for the new acquirer, especially focused on mobile publishing. Then I spent a bunch of time in business development and potential distribution, so more commercial business development there. And then obviously then Twitch happened and so on and so forth.
Yeah, we can get to that as well. But I think what I hear so far, Sajjad, and I think it's really important to point this out, is that you've not been someone who shies away from need or uncomfortable or different challenges, right? And the reason why I was highlighting in terms of, why did you how did you skip from one sort of domain to another of expertise is because normally, when kids are in their 20s or later down the line as well in their careers, they do think that, okay, if I'm a doctor, I need to stick to become a doctor. I think that's what's cultural as well, in a sense. अगर डॉक्टर बन गए तो डॉक्टर ही बने रहो, अगर टीचर हो तो टीचर ही बनो, अगर इंजीनियर हो तो इंजीनियरिंग पूरी जिंदगी करनी है. And I think that's what I'm trying to get to, with your journey as well. That it's really inspirational that you went from being an engineer to, different sides of the domains that you've experienced. And you've been not shying away, from, for example, if you don't know how to sell a business, then you went and learned how to do that. And yeah, the exit was massive, which is commendable. So good job on that. But
I'll tell you what. So yes, I've always been open to new things and going into unfamiliar territories.
Yes.
But look, I won't take all the credit, right? Some of this happened by chance, right? It was forced upon me. Like I didn't take the corporate strategy job. I took essentially a product strategy job. And the reality was that, hey, I was only going to be keeping the job if I figured out how to do corporate strategy. So
yeah.
I think grit, right, is really important. And I guess, I don't know if I had it or learned it or developed it over time, but that's really important to have, I think, especially if you're going to be experimenting or taking on challenges that you're not familiar with in your career.
Wow. But what was the biggest learning for you once you exited the business?
Lots of learnings. I guess I had really good mentors there, right? So the CEO, my boss, who was the SVP of strategy, or sort of the CEO role, I learned how a restructuring effort works and how hard it can be to execute a turnaround. Because and I had not done very massive startup to scale up opportunity before that, but I learned to appreciate the effort and the skills required to do a successful turnaround and drive an exit. I'd say the second thing I learned was that I don't want to do another one. because they're pretty hard. They're pretty hard because you have to, the biggest difficulty in turning around a ship is culture. And culture is, I guess, and I used to think of that as a cliche that people use, right? Whenever somebody talks about strategies, somebody will start throwing culture out there. But I realized that was super important, that it's really hard to build culture. It's really hard to keep culture. It's really hard to how to shape or reshape culture. And to a certain extent, we were able to do that. I'm not saying that, Jagex has gone on to be a very, very successful company after that. And he was think about the business in a different way, to think about working in a different way, and making decisions in a different way. And I think that did contribute to the overall success. Now the companies, I think you can go and look at their success as of today. I think they're probably a unicorn now or more. And now they're acquiring businesses and publishing third-party games and so on and so forth. And RuneScape, that game itself, is now growing still growing after 21 or 22 years, probably more.
Wow, that's amazing. That is definitely massive, man. But एक और सवाल which I have, Sajjad, is that how did you move from Jagex after an exit? Did that sort of entice you to become an entrepreneur, or were you like, okay, I want to continue on the path that I'm on, and then you moved on to Twitch and then Unstoppable Domain? So how did that sort of come about?
So after Jagex, I'll be honest over here, right?
Yes.
So 2016, the company got exited. It was acquired by a Chinese PLC, a financial investor. They were looking to build, presence in games in the West, were looking to acquire more companies. They had a very big kitty to invest, and giving the management team a lot of freedom to do stuff. Wow. So that worked well for about a year. I was promoted to VP of Biz Dev and Strategy. Here's the funny thing, right? So this is where the MBA story comes into play. So when Jagex exit was happening, I could see it happening 6 months out because I was driving the sale process. So I knew this thing would probably be sold in 6 months. And I was already thinking, okay, do I want to stay back after the sale or not? Right. And I had had this dream of going and doing a PhD in operations research, right?
Mhm.
I don't even remember why I wanted to do that, but it was actually, yeah, so it was something I wanted to do after Stanford.
Okay.
I was doing operations research, ended up doing operations research in finance, but didn't do my PhD. And there are a few doctors in my family, so maybe that chip on the shoulder was playing in, and
Yeah.
I wanted to go back and do the PhD. So I got a full scholarship at
Wow.
Cambridge in operations research. It was like full 4 year scholarship,
Mhm.
and I was like, great, I'm have the exit. I can probably stay afloat for a while without being worried about finances, and
Yeah.
I'm just going to do PhD. Cambridge is a lovely city to live in as a student, especially if you have some money. So I mean, you can really enjoy that. But when the exit happened,
Mhm.
that's when the proverbial metal met the meat, right? Which was this sort of backseat dream of doing a PhD
Mhm.
started competing with what I'd been doing more recently, which was so much more exciting, which was in the industry and shaping the strategy of a business and actually making decisions that
Mhm.
impact hundreds of millions of people out there or users out there.
Yeah.
So immediately that sort of thing kicked in. I still wanted to educate. I still want to
Mhm.
go back to academia because I felt I was getting rusty. I was wanting to sort of refresh. But uh, some people helped me out in that decision process.
Wow.
Uh, my boss there at that time and the CEO,
Mhm.
and I was able to convert that PhD scholarship towards an MBA.
Oh, wow.
And I did a part-time MBA at Cambridge because I was living and working there, so it was fun. And so the next 20 months after the acquisition, I spent doing the MBA and working and
Right.
doing business development, corporate development. Eventually, I felt that companies' appetite for growth through inorganic means like business and corporate development was dying down a bit. During my time at Jagex, I'd spent a lot of thought into how Twitch could help a game company like Jagex. So, in fact, the
Wow.
product team had done a lot of work there.
This is so
So Twitch
interesting
was,
now where it's leading up.
yeah,
Okay.
there
Yeah.
was a natural connection there. I had applied to Twitch. I didn't get in the first time, right? They rejected me without even looking at my resume, so which was fine. But
Mhm.
then uh, for the wrong role probably. But 3 months later, I got the call, and this was through a VC friend. So this was through a friend who was looking to hire me in VC, and ended up saying, "Look, this is probably a much better gig at this time, and you can always come back to VC after doing more work at a scale up like Twitch." So yeah, that's that's how that change happened, and I ended up at
Mhm.
Twitch as director of BD in 2018.
Wow. Coming back to your Twitch experience, Sajjad, like maybe we can get more into that. Like, how was that whole experience for you? How was it different from Jagex? Like, what did you learn?
Yeah.
It's a really
So
big name.
so
It's a very big name.
so here I was,
Yeah.
top of the world.
Mhm.
I just finished my MBA at Cambridge.
Yeah.
I had just, done really well at Jagex, right? Got to VP from director, sold the business, grew the
Yeah.
business. And, I got into Twitch, which was at that time, probably still is to a large extent, but definitely at that time was one of the hottest
Yes.
tech companies to work at. It
Mhm.
was acquired by Amazon. It was in a space that was well beyond anything else in regular ad-based VOD.
Yeah.
So it was changing the way people look at video versus YouTube
Mhm.
and other VOD players. And there was nobody else competing with it. It had like 80%, 90% category share in live entertainment, live interactive entertainment. So I was on top of the world, and I had just gotten a job as director of BD for Mia. So you know what? And
Wow.
coincidentally, I just had my first child. So
Oh, yeah.
that was
Wow.
an amazing start, right? Probably one of the best memories I have.
Wow.
And boom, right? And boom, I get into the job and I figured out actually, uh, I was thinking about the wrong way. So the first thing when I made a choice
Mhm.
picking which amongst various options I had at the end of my MBA was I wanted to work in big tech and with a brand like Amazon and Twitch.
Mhm.
And I felt that it's gonna be cushy and gonna be steadily and slowly building. Whoa, boom, first day in, the pressure was on, right? Deals had to be done, KPIs had to be met, 6-pager docs had to be written, and had the wrong assumption coming in. So first thing, learned my lesson immediately, and was sort of burning the midnight oil and
Yeah.
and trying to get ahead of getting ahead of the job
Mhm.
itself. The second thing I realized was that this was after 4 years in a mid-sized scale up, I was going into a very large
Yes.
company.
Yeah.
And I realized that the job that was advertised, right, was not what I was going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. So, I thought I'm going to go coming in and I'm going to be signing big fancy esport deals and,
Yeah.
setting up massive, esport tournaments. And maybe I'm going to go and acquire the rights to, IPL and, bring that to Twitch. And everybody's like, hold on. Let's just figure out how to get some basic business planning done. So, and think backwards. So start thinking about writing strategy again and resetting. I had no team, so I was a IC initially, right? I went from leading a 10% team, 10-20% team to leading 0 people all of a sudden and building everything from scratch. So I learned new lessons there, right? So first of all, had to relearn what I needed to do there, which was going to be a lot more about planning, how to define strategy for the region, for Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Twitch, what expansion means. And I think the biggest lesson I learned immediately there was that Amazon has some fantastic principles that they use to make decisions. And I think that's at least based on my experience, that's one company that actually uses those values to make decisions on a day in, day out basis, right? You go in a meeting, if you're disagreeing about something, people will use and quote that principle and challenge you and say, look, this is why I'm calling this out. Tell me why you disagree, right? And one of those principles is working backwards from the customer, which is the fantastic skill that I highly recommend everybody learns. I think there's some two Amazon alums have written a book on this as well. I'm forgetting the name of the book, but I'm pretty sure if you look at working backwards book, you'll find it. So yeah, that was the experience. Eventually ended up being building a team out, steadily found success, went from learning and doing the Amazon operating planning process, which is very much focused on how do you define plans based on working backwards from the customer, then measure plans and so on and so forth, to setting up many ways and make that interactive. Then went on to build the esports content acquisition and sports content acquisition team. It was and doing that piece. So working with some of the leading esport production companies and distributors in EMEA, as well as working with some of the leading football clubs in Europe that were actually starting to think about what live interactive entertainment means, right? What does a companion experience mean to watching the game inside the stadium? And then eventually growth PD, right, which was distribution. So how do you get Twitch on different screens? How do you make sure that Twitch is on your mobile, wherever you go, on your TV stream, so on and so forth. And eventually, that led me to various successes and failures. I'd say another thing I learned in that process was that when you go join a big tech company, and if you're not in America, right, in the region, you need to figure out very quickly how do you add value, right? Because US based, at least up until now, and I've invariably heard the same story in other places as well, that if it's US-based technology business, they probably have the core in the US and they'll have an expansion view in other regions. Now, regional teams can obviously Europe, Middle East, and Africa is a massive region, right? Probably arguably a bigger opportunity than the US itself over the long horizon. But those teams really need, and when you come on and join that team in a leadership role, you really need to figure out how you can add value quickly and show results. And actually, show that you're not a satellite team helping initiatives, but you can actually drive initiatives. And that's again a lesson I had learned there, because I had not done that before. I had not worked for a US big tech player before. Jagex was a UK based company. I was working with a CEO who sat in the next room to me, but Twitch was based out of San Francisco. I was in London. And I realized that, if I'm just trying to play, support, I am not really going to be doing work that I want to do. So I need to put my foot down and bring opportunities to a table that are nuanced and specific to the region, but also meaningfully important to the overarching global business for Twitch. And I think it took me time to learn that, right? Because I was used to just having, the whole plate, but now I had to fight for my share of the plate and show what can be done. So that was a learning at big tech, and I think that's something that I know that would be important for me if I go and join another large technology company out of the US expanding into Europe or another region, because the same playbook would work.
I think that's a very important learning, though, especially for people who are, building their careers in Europe, because most of these, main headquartered companies in the US, when they do expand to Europe, I think, like you mentioned, it's the same playbook. So it's very good learning to actually share. So that's nice.
It's college. I would have learned it much earlier, but this time I was already a few years into my career, so I did not know this. I was not anticipating this going in, but it took me like a few months to realize, hey, there are two ways to do this. Either
Yeah,
be a satellite,
true.
right, or be a driver. So yeah, I picked the latter.
But I think it also really depends on the level of like the leadership roles, right? For example, if you're straight out of college and if you join a company like that, you might not feel it at a pace like yours. If, for example, you went straight into Twitch at a senior leadership role, which is why you probably felt that pressure or that, sort of faster than the rest in a sense.
Yes, I agree. I mean, yes, to a large extent, it would matter more in a more senior role, but I'd still say that if you're joining as a product man or like a marketing manager in Europe for a US centered, US headquartered tech company, you'd probably face similar challenges because you're going to be a PM, a lead PM there in America who's going to be driving, or maybe lead product marketing manager in America who's going to be driving all the roadmap and efforts. And then you need to, of course, you need to play assist, right? Like that you need to play as a team, but then you need to figure out how you can add that extra mile of value. Like how do you sort of add and accelerate and catalyze the business in your region? And it sounds simple because you're like, yes, I mean, I'll just go and do it.
Yeah.
But when you're not in the headquarter, figuring that out is harder.
Yes.
So that was a whole bunch of lessons, right, that I learned over Twitch over the 4 years I was there.
Amazing. But apart from like just experience relevant, I think Sajjad, one more question that I had was relevant to your experience, but not just relevant to the bigger companies, but in general, in terms of career trajectory. For kids who want to dive into the fields of business development or corporate strategy, what is your advice to people who are starting off in this field?
Interesting. So I think there are different routes to ended up being in those kind of roles. The traditional route would be that you go do your MBA, and I'm talking about corporate strategy because BD is probably different. So for corporate strategy, you go to your MBA, you end up in investment banking or in consulting, and then eventually you exit that to go into corporate strategy in a technology company. That's the more traditional route. That was not my route, right? I was not looking to be in this space. I think my route was through, trial by fire.
Right.
So I did my MBA, and although my MS at Stanford and then eventually my MBA, but it was more chance driven and being, given the opportunity to do that kind of work. So I would say that, and before I go and sort of give you my overarching perspective, BD is different because I think business development is, I would say, you could go from, whatever degree you've done, right? It doesn't need to have an MBA. You need to learn to sell, and you need to learn to sell, and you need to learn to be passionate about product and think deeply about a product. And I think if you have those two skills, you'd probably do well at BD. And then just go in early, right? You'd probably go from product to BD or BD to product. Those two can intersect, and I've seen people switch from one to the other and then back. So I would say go in that direction. Having a STEM background would help, especially math background, because you accidentally trying to figure out how to make two different complex entities work together or sign a deal or sell something and make a proposition work for a customer. And having some mathematical ability is useful. So yeah, though that's my sort of specific view on each of those pathways. I'd say that my overarching perspective is, if you're not going to go into a core hard skill role, like for example, engineering, then you probably want to be focusing on, rather than that particular role, I focus on a product or a company that you love, right?
Right.
And then learn as much about their business and the product, and eventually you'll find a role there, and eventually I think you'll find a way to the right role in that business, right?
Mhm.
Because if you are interested enough and you're passionate about enough about something, if you get attached eventually to it, you'll probably find your way to the right role and the right trajectory inside that business.
True.
So rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to go to corporate strategy at XYZ company, I think it's more important to say, I want to work with this product because I think it's super interesting, or in this category, or in this particular company. And then you'll find your way towards that role.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah.
I think if there's one follow-up question that I really want to ask you, is that you mentioned around, the idea of skilling. Oh, sorry. You mentioned the idea of learning how to sell, like the skill to sell, right? So I just want to understand, like, how can you develop that skill set, whether it's regarding, selling to customers, selling your business, like the main core of selling, like where would that come from?
Pitch a lot, right? I'd say, like I learned it. I wasn't in business development up until I'd say from up until 2017. So
Right.
I'd not done BD, I'd not done sales. And I'd say that, you need to, and I learned by pitching. I learned by coming up with an idea and pitching, and then, doing some academic study. I looked,
Yeah.
I mean, if there's a best practices book on BD, there probably you should find one. But I'd say, obviously, there's a lot of good books on selling.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure you could recommend way better ones than I could. But learn by pitch. Learn by pitching is what made work for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
Makes
I
sense.
was initially pitching. If I go back to my first pitch, I'm trying to remember what it was. I mean, obviously, I was
Mhm.
pitching myself, right, for
Yeah.
interviews. So
That's
and failing probably, right, before my MBA and whatnot, and uh, I steadily improved on that. And then eventually, when I started doing BD, I don't remember what the first pitch was. I was successful, but there were a bunch of them that failed before then. And every time I figured out where I tried to, every time I pitched, I would go back and think what I was doing well, what was not doing well, and try to remember and recollect how the person who was listening, my audience or my customer, how they were responding. And then I would go and improve on that. And I would actively get feedback as well. So even when I was told, hey, this is work, I would ask of what didn't work. Was it the proposition? What was it? The messaging. What was it that did not land it for you? Is there anything I could solve? And I think that helped me improve my selling skills over time.
Mhm. Wow, no, that's super interesting. And I'm sure people who are going to be listening to this are definitely going to be taking away, something or the other in terms of learning how to, building the skill set. One more
Hopefully.
thing that I really want to talk about, Sajjad, is how, again, because you did have a chance to work with a really massive company in the Web3 world called Unstoppable Domains. So how did that move come about from Web2 to Web3, moving from Twitch to Unstoppable Domains?
Yeah, so that happened. So again, the backstory was this is again linked to,
Mhm.
when I started at Twitch, I was finishing up my MBA and I wrote my thesis during my MBA on ICO's disrupting venture capital, which
Wow.
was again, it sounded academically interesting. Later on, turned out they didn't disrupt. But again, right now, you have a lot of VCs investing through initial token offerings, and
Yep.
that model has changed, right? Investing through tokens is a big democratizing uh, is a big factor for democratization in the space, in the investment space. At least, hopefully, it will continue to be. But so yeah, when I finished my MBA, I was into Twitch. I was not going anywhere else, but I'd written my thesis there. So over time, 2017, actually 2018 onwards, I started investing a little bit into crypto and
Right.
reading up a bit more about
Mhm.
projects, and read the Infinite Machine and so on and so forth, and steadily, starting to chip away
Yeah.
at on the outskirts of crypto to sort of study, peel the onion over time.
Mhm.
And I was not ready to go deep into it, but I was approached by an executive recruitment firm back in 2021. Um, and they pitched me this business, which was at that time somewhere around 50 people, uh, had very good traction, was in crypto, but not doing a token,
Right.
uh, and had a really good team, on paper. and it sounded interesting. So I just wanted to have a conversation. I heard one of their podcasts and I really liked what they were saying.
Mhm.
So I had a conversation with them, and it was super interesting what they were building. So building identity,
Yes.
user own identity, which was a very promising concept. So yeah,
And
I think
it is
I guess
actually. It's still
yeah,
a
so
really hot topic in Web3.
it
So
is. It is. It's done really well. So
mhm.
so that happened, and uh, I guess all those things landed well with me, right? The product, the team, the traction, the economics,
Mhm.
everything made sense, and I felt that I'd spent enough time at a very large business. I'd spent 4 years roundabout at Amazon/Rich, so
Mhm.
I thought that it was time for me to go back to a startup,
Wow.
and that's how it happened.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself like more suitable for a smaller startup environment or a big tech sort of a scale up?
Hmm. I'd say it depends. I'll tell you what, I don't think there's a binary answer to that, because I think it depends on where you are in
Mhm.
your career, as well as how where are you are at what how you're doing in life, and
Yes.
what
Yeah.
other considerations you're facing, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'd say that in cer- in certain situations, you probably would benefit more from a big tech job, uh, and maybe in other situations, the startup experience would be more valuable for you.
Yeah.
I think for me, both were equally valuable.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it really comes down to, for me in particular, I'd say right now I'm probably gonna go do another startup.
Right.
So
Got it. Okay.
I think that's where I am at right now. I'm
Mhm.
taking a break. Like I said, there's a illness in my family, and I didn't want to, I want to be there for the family. So I'm gonna be off for a few months, but probably will go back to the startup space rather than go to big tech.
Got it. And do you ever plan to start something on your own, Sajjad? Is that something that you're cooking in the pipeline or not yet?
Uh, yeah, I think there are a couple of things in the pipeline,
Mhm.
but it's not. How should I put this? It's not uh, cooked enough to disclose
Mm.
just yet. So I think for me, like I want to be, whatever I'm going to be doing next is going to be around a product or a mission that I'm really keen on. Right now,
Right.
if that's somebody else building and I'm helping, I'm
Mhm.
fine with that. If it's nobody else building that, and I think I have enough conviction to do it myself, then that's what I'm going to do.
Amazing, amazing. But I really want to know because Sajjad, I see a lot of people, moving from Web 2 to Web 3 now because again, and also AI because as soon as new topics come up, everybody starts changing their LinkedIn profiles. Everybody
Yeah.
now suddenly an expert in the field. But coming from someone who actually has experience in Web 3, I really want to know like how is that a different sort of a domain in terms of working or like the entire like experience, how was it different from any other Web 2 company for you, or if it was in the first place?
Yeah. So I'll tell you one thing though, right?
Mhm.
I had other opportunities at the Web3 companies as well.
Right.
I was not aiming to go into Web3, right?
Okay.
I'm not a Web3 maximalist. Everything has to be decentralized. I'm not that guy. So
Right.
I wanted to go to a company that was solving a really interesting problem, which was user control identity, right?
Mhm.
Enabling control and own the data. That's what I wanted to do. That's why I went to unstoppable domains, right? That's the reason.
Yes.
uh, Web3 was just where they were building it,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
makes sense, right? But that's my my two pieces on that. But going back to how my experience was in Web3 was really good. I think it was the speed of execution is much faster.
Right.
There are far fewer pieces of red tape that you have
Mhm.
to cut across to get things done.
Right.
And being in partnerships and BD, I'd say people are more open to experimenting than what you would experience in traditional big tech, where you're just dancing around for six
Mhm.
months, getting to know and just doing your diligence until you're 95% sure that nothing can go wrong, and then you
Yeah.
find a way to move one tiny piece forward. I'd
Mhm.
say uh, uh, the speed of execution was way faster. Like we were going at the speed of hundreds of partnerships,
Wow.
uh, every quarter. So um, I think there are challenges in Web3 as well. I
Mm-hmm.
think that afterwards, and I'm not going to name any names,
Mm-hmm.
but in retrospect, when I reflect on my time at Unstoppable, I felt that I got to work with a lot of Web3 uh, builders and businesses and DAOs as well.
Mm-hmm.
And what I felt was that under the hood, a lot of people are still building for speculators,
Right.
and there's not a lot of real usage,
Mm-hmm.
and that's scary, and that's very scary. And I think it's a bit too late to just say that, you know what, right now we just need to build community, usage will come later.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the community is all the community is doing is shilling your product and just speculating on it, you're not building a product that's gonna last, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So and I think I saw a bit too much of that in Web3 right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my big concern. So I think a lot of the existing players, I'm not talking to only one particular category, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
I got the opportunity to work with all kinds of players like gaming, on ramps, wallets, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But um, but yeah, I think a lot of Web3 ventures are chasing the wrong metrics.
Right.
They are looking at community the wrong way,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in my opinion, and that's going to be troublesome if they don't get it right. But then there are quite a few. I would say not the majority, but quite a few
Mm-hmm.
that are focusing
Yeah.
on customers first and foremost, are focusing on usage, are focusing to understand how
Mm-hmm.
once a customer or a user or a member adopts the product, how do they interact with it? And they spend 90% of the time doing that versus just trying to get the
Mm-hmm.
community to chill a lot and then do
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
Twitter space and try to just try to get a few more of their units out or a few more tokens out. I think uh, yeah. So
No,
that
completely
piece
agree with that,
a lot.
actually. Completely agree
Yeah.
with that. But I think I really want to understand, Sajjad, like in terms of Web3, like I really want to understand because a lot of people now want to get started in the new domain. But again, related to the startups as well, there are a lot of people, a lot of, credible sources and also different sources out there on LinkedIn, Reddit, Twitter, like it's just everywhere. So how can, like, what is your advice for people to get started in Web3 would be my first question. And then the next question is somewhat related to the trends. Like, what are you most bullish on, regardless of Web2 and Web3, both, like just regular general tech?
Yeah. So how to get started? I'd say that, I mean, my start was different, but I'd say it's much more open, right?
Yeah.
So uh, you go and contribute to a DAO. The knowledge in the space is much more accessible. Go and read up on it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Generate noise in communities,
Yeah.
show that you're keen to learn. And I'm pretty sure that if you're doing all of those things, the right people will get the signals and they'll go and come and find you and bring you on board.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good way of getting started. um, I think uh, the second thing I would say is be wary of speculation driven ventures,
Mm-hmm.
because you might get lucky and you might make a bit of money, maybe a lot of money,
Yeah.
but and in the short term, right, where something works out and it clicks and you're at the right time at the right place with the right incentive to make a lot of money.
Yep.
But probably there's a larger chance that you will not learn the right things.
Mm-hmm.
You be spending a lot of time in helping somebody um, uh, you know build build for speculation, right? Versus build a product that lasts.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be very useful for you, especially if you don't make the money either.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'd say be careful in picking a bet in Web3.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's a lot of different stuff in there.
Got it.
Um, so those are
What
two sort
trends
of
that you're bullish on in tech?
what are our trends. I mean, okay, of course, right? AI of all sorts.
Yeah.
So even on my little excursion right now in my time off, I guess I am just starting to get into this space, not just because I want to work in it, but I just want to learn, right? So
True.
inspired the neuron to newsletters I've gone into. I am going back to my math, so actually reading up on the math behind
Wow.
AI and machine learning. I did a bit of it way back and it's forgotten everything. So I just want to go back to the basics. So I
Right.
do think the space has tremendous potential. Um, it's going to change a lot of things, not and very, very soon. It's going to change a lot of things very, very soon.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't need to talk a lot about it, right? Like I think uh, the ability to take an idea to market and the time, effort, and skills required to do it will shift, will be compacted.
Mhm.
So um, so I think that as human beings, we would have we will need to spend a lot more. We would have the ability, right, or freedom actually. That I'm looking at the positive things rather than risks of
Yeah.
AI and everything.
Mhm.
I have a lot more time to think about ideas and how to make changes and how to ask uh, AI and computers the right questions
Wow.
to build the right things.
Mhm.
I think building those things would become easier. So I'm trying to sort of reconfigure my thinking towards that. Right, learning better ways of learning is going to be more important
Mhm.
than just having a skill of coding or whatever, like some product management skill or content writing skill. I think those will become less important over time. And I think I'm very bullish on the space. And there's so many vectors there that we can keep talking for hours about
Mhm.
that.
For sure.
Web3, I'm still bullish on in general, but I think more specifically, I am very bullish on Web3, the decentralization opportunity in energy infrastructure.
Mm.
I think that's going to be um, very interesting. I had the opportunity to visit Cambridge University, where I spoke to one of the founding members of Carbon 13, which is sort of a clean tech venture accelerator, and I could see a few of their teams working on stuff that was really crazy interesting at the intersection of energy, clean tech, and decentralization. So I think that's going to be a space that's ripe for disruption when it comes to
Mhm.
centralization, and it's not been done yet. So that's super interesting. I'd say I'm
Cool.
also pretty bullish on in general on the space where companies are focusing on sustainability as a core component of their proposition,
Mhm.
because I think it matter a lot more than just having it. It does already, right?
Yeah.
Regulation is going to be increasingly focused on it, and I think businesses that help consumers become more sustainable are going to be very successful.
Mhm.
And in that end, technology-driven businesses, whether it's fintech or e-commerce, that enable consumers to be more sustainable, will probably be more successful down the line as well.
Yeah.
So these are the three off the bat that I think I'm very keen on and I'm exploring actively.
Amazing. That brings me to my last question. Thank you so much again for sharing all your learnings and work experiences as well, Sajjad. It's been a pleasure. Also holding you back right before Iftari time, but last question, promise. So the
No
question
worries.
is, considering the market that we're in right now, the stock market, crypto, everything around us, recession, वगैरह, सब कुछ चल रहा है. What is your advice to people looking for jobs or who are laid off and now trying to figure out what to do next, pivot careers, change domains? What should they, like, what is your advice?
Hmm. Uh, I think my advice would be the same as my advice on investing, which is focus on the long term if
Mm-hmm.
you can. So in the short term, if you are in a situation where you need to make ends meet, you can figure it out, right? I mean, that's that but don't compromise on what you think or are passionate about on the long horizon, because eventually these macro headwinds and this, various kinds of geopolitical turmoil
Yeah.
that's driving these macro headwinds will change. I think we will be in better cycles over time, and then there will be new opportunities. So stay focused on the long horizon. Stay focused on what matters the most to you and what you find most interesting in terms of work. and what you want to apply yourself to on the long horizon. And if it's required in the short horizon, figure out how to make ends meet, probably with some learning new skill, right? And I think I would say investing time in that would be a good thing. I'm doing the same thing right now. So I'm not working. I've not been working for the last 2 months. I'm in a somewhat fortunate position that I don't need to worry about the short term right now. But I also don't want to, like, I'm of course I'm doing this to focus on my family,
Yeah.
but I'm also taking time to reskill myself, right? I'm not just sitting on my MBA that I did 5 years ago. I'm actually, I brought a few books with me to read into. I am trying to spend, at least a few hours exploring AI and trying to understand and get my bearings around it. So I'd say just keep doing that, keep learning, focus on the long horizon, make things work in the short horizon.
Yep, that's a great perspective to share. Thank you so much, Sajjad, again for the episode and for sharing your journey. Pleasure hosting you. We were trying to get you on for a very long time, but I'm really glad that we finally had a chance. So thank you so much for this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks, Tanya. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.